I wanted something that was going to be uplifting and
Mm.
that would fill me with enthusiasm and joie de vivre again. I just wanted to enjoy life.
My name is Paul Harvey, and this is Life, Passion and Business. We're about helping you explore, finding your passion for life and the work that you do. But it's so much more than that. It's about finding clues to the big life questions. What does it mean to be successful? What is the meaning of life? If you're looking for more, then join me on this journey where together we will discover through interviews, tools and tips how to live life full of meaning, passion and purpose. Soul alignment is this week's topic of conversation with Robyn Harris. It is a story of how following a passion can sometimes take us to a place of hopelessness. However, there is a happy outcome. When I asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up, Robyn's considered reply was Doctor Doolittle. It is hardly surprising then that the future held a place for animals and for language interpretation, albeit a very different type of interpretation than the fictional character. Robyn's journey begins with her shared passion for nature and animals. She says that it plays a big part in the work that she now does as a soul alignment mentor. Her passion for language began while studying Latin at school and led to a university degree in British Sign Language. After qualifying, Robyn became a sign language interpreter. For her, the work was about sharing her desire to communicate by giving deaf people the opportunity to be understood and connect with the world around them. Our conversation takes an insightful look into the world of signing and touches on the qualities that the deaf community can bring to the rest of us from their unique perspective on life. It also reveals the challenges they face integrating, being understood and having their needs met in a world that is clearly not designed for them. Robyn loved the work, however being the bridge between these two separate communities was often stressful, and over time it took its toll. The interpreter is not permitted to express their opinion, and she found it challenging to witness how deaf people were treated and often misrepresented. This distress eventually led to stress, ill health and depression, and she now sees that as a lack of soul alignment. So seeking help, Robyn found that traditional medicine in the UK only offered to fix the symptoms with drugs. The other option was counselling, and while it was effective, it could not solve the deeper inherent problems. Robyn's search for alternatives opened a completely new world to her. It started with evolutionary enlightenment with Andrew Cohen, and his work is about the awakening of the consciousness and the bigger ideas of who we are as humans. From there, Robyn discovered Reiki and eventually meta-consciousness that led her to the understanding of her condition and the true path of healing. In this part of the conversation, we talk about how unresolved thoughts and feelings lead to illness and how energy medicine connects with the physical world. Today, Robyn is the founder of EQUENERGY, Wellbeing Naturally. She describes herself as a soul alignment mentor and works with people who are at the end of their rope and needing support. Quoting Oprah Winfrey, she says, "A mentor is somebody who helps you see the hope within yourself." Robyn's personal story of returning to health and wellness from a place of hopelessness and depression is inspiring and accomplished without drugs or traditional Western medicine. Her journey involved love, compassion and personal soul alignment. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Robyn Harris. I am so pleased today to be talking to Robyn Harris, and thank you so much for being here with me today. It's a pleasure to have you on the line and working with me today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And yeah, I'm delighted to be here on your podcast. Thank you, Paul.
Well, this is Life, Passion and Business. We are all about that journey that we are on, the journey of life. Because there has to be more to it, doesn't there, really? But, some people, we all have our own journey and everyone has a choice of journey. So what's your journey been like? Where did it all start for you?
The journey that I'm kind of currently on, the work around well-being, started Well, I originally thought that it started, say, about 10 years ago, but actually looking back, I think it started way before that. I think it's something that's kind of been there underlying most of my life, particularly because I've always had a passion for nature. I've always had a passion for animals, and they very much come into what I do. And I think it took me going away from that to realizing the impact that it had on me, or how I'd been drawn away from that and how that impacted on me and my well-being, that then brought me back around and gave me a deeper appreciation of why those things are so important in my life, and why it's important for everybody to have those passions and to connect in with them. They don't necessarily have to be nature and animals, though that is part of what I share, but it's really more about just getting back to who we really are, and that journey.
So how did it start for you? I mean, what did you want to be when you started on this journey as a child? Did you have a childhood dream?
I don't know that I did as a very small child. I never really had a concept of growing older at all. I never really had a vision of a life beyond, I guess, school. I just, that was as far as my vision went.
It must be a boy thing, because all the boys want to be Indiana Jones or astronauts or things like that. My last podcast, he wanted to be Indiana Jones, and it's like it's quite interesting. And others want to be. In fact, one of my guests wanted to be an astronaut, and he's actually looking at the possibility of paying for it because he can actually afford to do that.
Can
now.
now.
Yeah, and he said if it gets below 50 grand, he would probably think about doing it.
Wow. I think possibly what I would have liked to be is something like Doctor Doolittle when I was very, very small.
Yeah.
So I think there's often been an animal perspective to what I would like to do. And then later, when I was at school, I learned about sign language. And so that took me down a route where I became an interpreter in sign language, between sign language and English, because I'm passionate and fascinated by language and communication and connection and how that works, and about words and the creative power that words have in our life.
So you've always been a good writer?
I don't think my school teachers would have thought so, no. I remember getting lots of red marks on my essays when they were returned to me.
Well, we have to fail somewhere, don't we? We have to fail forward, don't we? We have to get...
I guess so, yeah. But yeah, I've always loved playing with how to express things. And I think that's what fascinated me so much about sign language, because it was such a different modality. I'd always been interested in language. We did Latin at school, and very few people actually speak Latin, but it's a route for so many other languages. So it gives you an understanding of many of the Romance languages, which I've used when I've been on holiday. So it's a great thing to have that skill, or looking at medications as well, because
the idea of Latin is wonderful, but the reality of it is quite difficult.
Yeah. Learning it, I think, is quite difficult, but just getting the understanding of how it works gives you a lot of tools to use in other areas. I'm sure,
because as you say, it's a root of most languages, certainly most European languages.
Yeah.
So where did your journey take you? Did you obviously you did the school route? Did you do college?
I did school, and then I did university, and then I worked for a company, and then I came back and I worked for the university at which I'd trained.
What did you do in university?
It was the interpreting work. So I came back. I studied to be an interpreter and came back to that particular unit of the university, that school within the university, to interpret for the staff and the students.
Wow.
But I realized that it wasn't quite as I'd imagined it would be, and it turned out to be very, very stressful. Plus my life at home was quite stressful at that time, and that was where I just started to kind of disengage with myself, I guess, not pay attention to my own needs, and that's what led me to then just be in such a low place, and I was feeling like everything needed to change. And I was, looking outside all the time. That has to change, and that person needs to do things differently. And it was very disempowering, really, until I then did some studying, because I'd gone to lots of different places to try and get help, all the ones that you're told to go to your GP, go to a counselor, etc., etc.
So when you say this level, what could you put a word? I mean, is there a word you could put to this? I mean, is this depression? Is this something? What would you put to this?
I kind of felt, I suppose it was kind of numbness, but a numbness in despair, where just there's no hope, hopeless. I think that's really what I felt. I guess there was depression. There was a lot of frustration, feeling like I just was going nowhere. I felt like I was in a dead end.
This is very common, you know. I think this is very common, and I think it's, you've recognized it. I think a lot of people don't recognize it, and they use outside stimulus to cover it. So they'll use drugs and other things to cover it, or they'll throw themselves into something, work or some other addictions, what have you, to find a way of actually breaking it or find a way of getting through it.
Absolutely. And I think probably most of us have gone through something along those lines at some point in our lives, or several points in our lives. And that's where I was. That's what I was doing. But realizing that it really wasn't helping me in the way that I wanted. I wanted something that was going to be uplifting and that would fill me with enthusiasm and joie de vivre again. I just wanted to enjoy life.
Nice word, joie de vivre. I haven't heard
Isn't
that.
it amazing?
No, it's a lovely word. Because it does, when it does, doesn't it? It encapsulates what you mean. It does. It gets. Yeah, I just want that thing. It's. Yes, I know exactly what you mean. Yes. Yeah, wonderful.
And I love those words, and I borrow them from other languages when I can as well, when I can't find them in English, that have a meaning that are so much more than the word itself. So now that I live in Wales, I've taken on cwtch. So that wonderful, warm, cozy, safe, that's so much more than the sum of its definition.
I live in Scotland, and we have a word which is dreek.
Yes.
And it's dreek today. The rain is going sideways out the window. It's definitely dreek today.
Yeah, I try to look for the more uplifting words.
Yeah, I can understand that one, but yeah, I agree. More uplifting's better. But
and dreek, some of these words, they just almost, even if you don't speak the language, so if you don't speak Welsh, if you don't know the Scottish traditions and culture, you still kind of get what those words mean.
Yeah, you do.
And hygge is one that's being used a lot.
Yeah,
now.
Yeah, the Danish idea of perfection yes, hygge, yes, candles and sitting by the fire and books.
Yeah. So again, that lovely, warm, cozy sense that you get behind these words.
So just take us a little back so that we can fill the story in. I mean, so you went to university, you came back from university, went back to university to be an interpreter. This is sign language interpretation, wasn't it? You said, was it signing, British Sign Language? Yeah. So was this a passion for you? Were you kind of driven? What was the driver behind that? Is that about communication? Because that's helping the deaf communicate, isn't it? Effectively, people that can't communicate.
My perspective on it was that as an interpreter, you would level the playing field. You would give deaf people access where they hadn't had access before. Yeah. And so their lives could just be the same as anybody else's, because they are very much a linguistic community. That's how deaf people with a capital D, British Sign Language using deaf people, see themselves, as a linguistic minority rather than as a disabled group. So my perception of the role of interpreter would be that that's what you would make for them. You would make a world where they were a linguistic minority. They weren't a disabled group.
So now, look, ignorance here. I'm going to have to ask a stupid question here. So you got British Sign Language. So do you have French Sign Language and German Sign Language?
You have Langue de Signes François.
Okay.
So my pronunciation on that might be absolutely horrendous, but it's LSF.
Okay.
But yes, French Sign Language. But it's interesting because we have...
I'm sorry, I'm going to laugh. Do they have an accent?
Yes.
They have an accent.
And there's a Scottish accent and a Welsh accent and all of these accents within British Sign Language as well. It's a fascinating topic.
No, I know. I'm just laughing. I'm laughing because I'm making this up as I go along. I had no idea that there was an accent in sign language. I'm just joking about it, but there is. Okay, that's almost like stand-up. That's almost stand-up comedy worthy, because some people wouldn't realise that.
I know, and it can get you into a lot of trouble, believe me. But also, we talked about Latin before and about how that is the root of many other language families.
Yes.
Sign language has language families as well. But so in America, you would think we speak English, they speak American English, perhaps British Sign Language has an American, very similar equivalent. No. American Sign Language is related to French Sign Language, is related to Southern Irish Sign Language. Whereas Northern Irish Sign Language is related to British Sign Language and is also related to Australian Sign Language.
Because they have a different route, obviously. They have a different...
Because of the way they've travelled and spread.
Yes, of course. It's not, they didn't come from the Latin, they came from themselves. So they're bound to have come from the root. Oh, I love this stuff. I love discovering these things. This is fascinating. So I can see why that would be interesting. I mean, are you fluent in multiple sign languages?
Only British Sign Language, unfortunately. I used to know some of the American. I used to be able to use the Southern Irish version, but I've not used them for so long now that I'm too rusty.
So, okay, so we've got to this position now where you've lost something. Where did the colour drain out of it? Why did you lose it? Where did it go?
It was partly because of where I was working and the stress of that particular environment, and also discovering that being an interpreter doesn't level the playing field at all. There are so many other issues at play. And I could see the way that deaf people were being treated. You think if a deaf person is a lecturer at a university, they're a lecturer at a university, same as any other lecturer, but they're not. And it was really difficult to watch that happening and to see the many ways that deaf people, I'm now passionate about how our lives seem to shrink. When I was feeling in that sense of despair and hopelessness, my life just felt like it had shrunk, that there was no colour to it. It was just some dried up little husk. And I looked at deaf people's lives and I saw that their lives were being restricted. And there were so few options that were really properly opened.
Did they know their lives were being restricted? Were they aware of it? Were you aware of it because you were a person that could hear?
They were very much aware of it.
Okay.
And being an interpreter as well is your persona non grata, because you don't fit into either world completely in that role. Plus, you are making a living from a language that deaf people aren't allowed to use. They are not taught it at school, by and large. Most schools that were specifically schools for deaf children, where they were able to get together even and just sign amongst themselves in playtime or lunchtime, or, you know, because they were often boarding schools, so they would have been able to maybe communicate at night in sign language. Yeah. But most of those schools are now being closed. Schools are generally mainstream schools.
Right.
And you might have the one deaf child in the whole of the school. Okay. So they have no opportunity to use their own language. They don't get taught their own language, generally speaking. So if you don't have access to a language that is easy and smooth for you, then things right from the get-go are a struggle.
I didn't realize how tough that was. I always thought deaf people were educated in that and supported in that. I hadn't realized they weren't.
They are, but it happens from a very hearing-centric perspective. And for example, a deaf child might be taken out of regular classes to have
sign lessons,
have support in the lessons that they weren't able to access through English. So there's a lot of repetition and they miss out on chunks of the curriculum because they just don't have proper access to it. And if you think about maths as well, they start off being very, very good at maths because it's just numbers. But as soon as you develop into the maths that needs language, so you're talking about two trains coming down a track, one way, one the other way, or how many men did it take to dig a hole, or whatever. As soon as you start bringing English into it, then deaf people start slipping backwards relative to their peers.
So I can see why that would trouble you if you were
Well, it made me very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And still does. And just the work environment as a whole was very stressful. So there was work stress, there was home stress, and I was just shutting down bits of myself because it was just too stressful and too uncomfortable, and ended up making myself quite ill.
So clearly the medical profession wasn't going to help you. What was the solution?
Yeah, so I went to the GP and they gave me tablets, and those didn't help and I didn't like them. I went to a counsellor and that didn't help. So I thought, I'm not getting anywhere with anything out there. I'm just going to have to go off and do some research. So I did a lot of reading. I went on a course called Evolutionary Enlightenment, based on a book by the same name by Andrew Cohen. And I studied Reiki. Then I went and studied with the Healing Trust and started to learn a lot more about how our bodies actually work and their relationship to their inner environment and to the environment around them as well. And explored that more and more, and then went on to do metaconsciousness, which is all about that.
Metaconsciousness.
Meta-consciousness.
Okay.
So an overarching consciousness about how the body interrelates with its environment.
Wow.
And its responses to that. So if we have a symptom, why do we have that symptom, and why now? Why at this time in that part of our body? And
I've spoken to energy healers before, and they will tell me that it hits on the outer periphery of your energy, and then it starts to work its way in. And depending on where you are, would depend whether you can repel it or whether you bring it in.
Our understanding in metaconsciousness is that an incident happens, and if it's unexpected, dramatic, we feel very isolated in that we can't talk to anybody else about it, and we have no coping strategy in that moment. Then the body goes, what do I do with this thing? And the head brain, the heart brain, and the gut brain all kind of come together, and they work out what kind of an issue is this? What part of the body would normally deal with this kind of an issue? And even our vocabulary, again, coming back to words, gives it away. So do I think that I need to break it down? Do I need to digest it? Do I need to assimilate it? In which case it'll go into the gut somewhere. Does it kind of smell bad to me? Does it leave a bad taste in my mouth? Am I struggling to get my head around it? And it'll go into, the sinuses, or I'll get a headache because the tension is all being held in my head. So and there are 4 different brain relays. So whichever brain relay it hits, is it a survival thing? Is it protection? Is it my sense of self-worth? Or is it connection with the environment and with people around me? So whichever one of those it affects, it'll then affect the part of the body. And it's all just embryology, which part of the body develops at the same time as that brain relay.
Wow. So what did you discover in yourself, having done all this work?
Well, I had migraine headaches and I had IBS. So I had stuff that I was struggling to really get my head around. I had stuff that I was struggling to digest.
Digest and eliminate, by the sounds of it, because that's what IBS.
Well, yes, exactly. Yeah. So I was then able to narrow that down. Well, what is it that I'm struggling with? What is it that I'm not able to digest, not able to get out from my life? And then to take action that was much more targeted and directed and therefore effective. But just also to understand what's the underlying belief? What filter was I using to look at the world? And how could I then reframe that, turn that around, make it something that was much more supportive?
Mm-hmm.
What beliefs did I have? Where did those come from? When and why did I form those ones? And could I, knowing that, then take steps to change them?
That's quite a journey, isn't it? I mean, you did that on your own.
No, I was very fortunate that I started the journey on my own. But I then, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Because I'm unpicking beliefs, they're wicked little buggers and they won't come out. They got bloody hooks on them. They have to be unpicked really carefully.
And you kind of try to narrow down and pinpoint them, and they sneak off in another direction.
Yes.
They're
I know that they're elusive little things. And I mean, I've unpicked beliefs. Been doing it for years, but I've done it a lot. I've done a little bit with people. A lot of it I've done with affirmation. I've done by overlaying the thing. So probably it's still bloody there, just covered up under affirmations.
Well, I think Dr. David Hamilton wrote his book, I Heart Me, all about neuroplasticity and how we can kind of support ourselves. I suspect
that's it. I've grown channels bigger than those beliefs, so they don't actually affect. They don't have the same power over me.
Possibly you've made new connections that are so strong that the other ones have faded away, or at least are so ineffective now because they're so weak.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me. So where did this lead you? Because you did all this work. Were you still interpreting at this point all this time?
Yeah.
And did it get easier? Did you find balance in this?
I think it got a little bit easier because I had the other stuff that was what supports me and builds me and
because the crap part of it is the bit that made you feel uncomfortable is still there. It's not going to go away. Deaf people are still being misrepresented or unsupported.
Yeah. So now I tend to work in different arenas. I did a lot of work in health. It was a fascinating project I was involved with last year, which is bringing mindfulness really to deaf people in the deaf community. So I like to work in that sort of thing that uses my skills from both sides, my skills around well-being, but also with sign language. So I love it when I can combine the two.
Yes, taking mindfulness into the deaf community must be really interesting because I say they, talking to them like as though they're someone else, but as humans that have evolved from a different perspective without the sense of hearing, they must have a completely different set of things to deal with. And
they have a fascinating way of they're called visual language peoples in some circles. So they have such a valuable perception of the world. We all have our own lenses through which we look at the world, but the deaf community as a collective, for a start, they're much more of a collective than we are generally in British culture because we're quite individualistic, but the deaf community really hold together as a community. And also they're very, very visually oriented, understandably.
Yeah.
So they can then bring that perspective and help people like myself and, general hearing population to be much more visual, to use that sense in a different way. It's like, I think anybody who has a different perception of the world really has rich things to share with the rest of us so that we can then maybe get some of that color and flavor from them too.
I mean, it's just opening up loads of questions from this conversation, and so this is not about you on some respects. This is becoming about something else because it's like I'm suddenly realizing I reckon deaf people are probably not represented politically in this country. There's not a single deaf MP, is there?
Not a sign language using MP, certainly. I mean, we used to have Lord Jack Ashley, but he was deafened rather than a member of the deaf community.
But even though it would be really difficult for someone who is deaf to engage in our political system because it's all about speaking.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would change it. I don't know how you would do anything different. Wow. It does open a huge amount of conversation here for me. So where are you now? I mean, where do you, and obviously if this is, you've been doing this work for a while, I take it, on yourself.
Wellbeing work, yes.
Yes.
I started my journey of building this business back in 2011.
Okay. So what is the wellbeing business?
So I use a lot of different energy techniques.
Yeah.
I help people to work out what the root causes are, like we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
and then how do they best address them for themselves? Because we are so individual and each person's journey is individual to them. So it's supporting people in really tuning in to who they are at their deepest soul self, I call it. So their deeper, most inner heart and soul. What is that guiding them to do? Because when we can really listen to that intuition, it lets us know when something is right, even when we don't know why. It's right for me, or something is off. I know that everybody's telling me I should do this and society thinks it's right, but for me it's just not right.
It's about that thing about getting used to using your intuition and get used to sense it, isn't it? Really getting used to feel it. You know?
Yeah, exactly. It's all about feel.
And what is fascinating is when you speak to also, and I spoke to a lot of people, you realize, I mean, that was one of the, I did this event last year called Spirituality. And one of the reasons I put this event on is that I had so many people on the podcast who would come and talk to me about something that happened to them, which was about connecting with their intuition, connecting with something greater than themselves, but they never realized it was actually a spiritual connection they were talking about.
But I think we have maybe this thought that a spiritual connection should be a religious one. Whereas to me, a spiritual connection is just anything that uplifts you and anything that helps you to connect with who you really are and to understand the beauty and the wonder and the majesty of who you really are.
I get the sense of it from me. Well, having done that event as well, it was very reinforced. It's a sense of connecting with the essence of life, the essence of your life and other life. It's about, and it can happen anywhere. You just connect with things or stuff.
And even just understanding what is this thing we call life.
Mm-hmm. One of the speakers on that event said, actually, you can connect with anything. And she actually took me through a process where I actually connected with the table and then connected with the chair I was sitting on, because it's all partly made of the same stuff. There's no difference. It's just I move, it doesn't.
It's just energy at a different vibration.
And it was like, oh, this is weird.
Yeah. It's kind of, I've just rewatched the film The Matrix. It's kind of just like that. It's just all the same stuff, but in different vibration and different, therefore, our sense of it is it solid? Is it moving? Is it whatever?
It's funny, this story has been, that the Matrix or the kind of things around that connection stuff, that has been in literature and in work for thousands of years. It keeps coming back and people keep looking at it and it keeps getting refreshed and coming back.
Yeah.
I mean, even down to the science fiction work I was reading in my teens. I think Isaac Asimov wrote some stuff, and some of his, I can see what he's getting at now I read it.
And you think if these things are recurring themes, there's something to them. There's something that draws us back to them, to re-explore them, to come at them from different angles and to create new theories around them and use them in different ways.
Yeah.
Which I think kind of shows that they're existential, that they're a part of life. They're a part of the questions that we ask, the exploration that we do through this thing we call life and living and the journey that we take.
Okay, look, I need to move us on because I'm getting hooked in. I always get bloody hooked in. Okay, how do you measure success? How has success been measured on your journey?
For me, success is about feeling well, whatever that means for an individual. And for me, it's not just that I don't feel sick, but it's feeling like I'm enthused about life and I want to explore things. I want to find out more. I love learning. So whatever that learning is, whether it's book learning or it's experiential learning or it's just living learning, I love it all. or finding out more about people. I'm fascinated by people. I'm fascinated by what makes them tick. I'm fascinated about just the life process. So success for me is feeling that I'm doing that and enjoying it and just loving the experience. Whether, even if it's a challenging experience, even if it's something that I'm not particularly comfortable with in the moment, that I know that it's taking me somewhere, that I'm growing.
Do you have any stories or tales around how life has changed for you since you took on this work? So anything, like things that have happened that are different than if you had done the work before?
I think nothing is different, but everything is different. Things still happen, life still throws curveballs and things, we go through everyday stuff. But now how I respond to things is so different to before. Now I'll just go, "Ooh, that's interesting." I've got back a sense of openness and curiosity and, "Oh, this is interesting. Let's just explore this." My vocabulary is very different. I've taken out the shoulds and the couldn'ts and the have tos and all of those things, and now using things that uplift me so much more and draw me in. Like, "Oh, that's interesting. That's curious. That's fascinating. That's a challenge. It's not a problem. It's not an issue, but it's a challenge. Ooh, let's just get stuck in." All of this kind of stuff. Whereas before I would have been going, "Oh no, how am I going to deal with this? This is just too much."
That's actually a very, very, that's a wonderful process, isn't it? That's a wonderful flip of that thing. Because, so many people address challenge with that, "Oh, how am I going to," whereas you look at it from the curiosity perspective, "Oh, this is going to be interesting. Now what's going to happen?" And it is amazing when we can do that. And it's not always easy, is it? I mean, it's not always easy. When the pipes burst and there's water through the ceiling, it's like it's just not
there are times when obviously something will happen and my first reaction might be more of a reaction than a response. But still, there's a little voice at the back of my head going, "Oh, right, there you've just gone off on that tangent again. Let's just take a step back. Let's get back to curiosity," rather than, because actually I went on a training course last year which looked at it. They called it the I, as in the I we see with.
Training course last year. Where did you go on a training course last year?
On Zoom.
Oh, cool. Sorry.
So it was looking at the I as in the I we see with, and the I as in the identity, and looking at how we see ourselves in the world and how that impacts on our sense of self and our well-being and everything. And through that, we looked at each person who attended our themes in life. And I discovered that mine is overwhelm. So it gave me, because another thing that I've really learned that has been so good for me is to forgive myself and self-compassion.
Forgiveness is powerful stuff, actually. That is really, I think that's the toughest thing of all, forgiveness. And then forgiveness of the self is even bloody harder.
But I think it's so essential. But I think that doing the work that I did, it could take you either way. It could take you into beating yourself up. "Oh, I did this and I did this and I did this." But when you really look at why we do things and the fact that actually we are just doing the best that we can with the resources we have access to in that moment, then suddenly it flips and, "Oh, that's why I did that." In a way, I couldn't help it. I was doing my best at the time. It was just that I didn't have access to the resources maybe I have access to now. Therefore, and being able to see the inner child and just go, "Oh, that little inner child, they couldn't help it. They were doing the best they could. There was a reason they did that thing, responded in that way, reacted in that way." And when you look at them like a child and you think, but if that was another, a real child, as in my child or somebody else's child that I was looking after, would I do the things that I do to myself? Would I say the things that I say to myself?
Good question. Well, you wouldn't say those things to a child, would you? And yet we happily say those things to ourselves. It's very true. Very true.
Whereas when you can start to see it just as, no, that's a child that did that. Then for me anyway, that really brought huge self-compassion for me.
Powerful stuff. So how do you see yourself as contribution? What do you see as your contribution to the world?
What I'm really, really keen to give to other people is hope. Because having been in that place of despair and feeling hopeless, I just couldn't really imagine being in a worse place when you're really at that, right at the bottom, and whatever the situation that's brought you to that place may be dire, and there may be levels of that. But I think for our own sense of self and life, being hopeless is pretty much near the bottom.
Yeah. And I mean, we are phrasing challenging times. We are in really weird times at the moment, and I guess there's a lot of people who are facing situations that look pretty bloody bleak and dire. So yeah, I can really hear that, and we can work like yours can make a difference. Yeah,
to be able to shine a light that people can see the hope. And I love Oprah Winfrey's quote that a mentor is somebody who helps you see the hope within yourself.
Yeah.
And that's why I chose mentor for my own title. That's how I describe myself, because that's what I think is what I have to share. Hope that whatever situation anybody might be in, you can turn it around. If I turned it around, anybody can turn it around. Well,
yeah, I mean, we fall, but there's always some point we stop, and there's always something, isn't there? There's most of the time the universe is out to support us. That's what I think.
Yes, but it's coming to the point where we can see that.
It is.
Because years ago, everything was against me.
Yeah.
It was not for me.
And I'm a firm believer is that things happen for you, not to you.
Yeah, but at the time, everything was happening to me, and it was all horrendous.
I know, it's bloody
nothing impossible. Supported me.
It's bloody impossible to see it when you can't see it. You can only see it from outside. It's like, when you're drowning. And that's truth of it.
Yeah.
And I know it's very glib of me to say this sometimes, and I do kind of like regret saying some of the things I say on this podcast occasionally. But it's like, I know it's tough when you're there.
But having been there and seeing that it is possible, and to a degree, we are no man an island, but at the same time, we are in our own place. Nobody else is on our journey. To be able to say from somebody who's taken that first step, feeling very much I was doing it on my own. Yeah. There is stuff out there that is supporting you, and what you need will appear when you need it.
Absolutely. And that's what is so fascinating. As you say, we're no man's an island, and yet only the man can choose to change. You had to choose to move from where you were. No one else could do it for you. Yes, they could hold your hand. Yes, they could do all sorts of things. They could say, look, come. But you still had to do it.
Yeah. Everything comes from within. Yeah. But it's knowing that within we have all those resources if we can just access them.
Yes. And also, I think what does help is knowing that someone outside of you loves you enough to help you and move you and draw you towards them.
And can see within you what you can't see in yourself, so that it sparks the belief in you, because you start to believe in you when somebody else believes in you. That's way back in my first job, which was before I trained as an interpreter. It was somebody seeing so much more in me than I saw in myself, and that has stuck with me always. So even now, if I have a day, like a great friend of mine calls them muddy puddle days, if I have a muddy puddle day and just everything seems like hard work or whatever, then I just remember George, his name was George, seeing stuff in me that I didn't see in myself. George believed in me. George was a great man, and if he, as a great person, saw things in me that he thought were good, then who am I to argue in a way? Absolutely.
So look, what's the one question I haven't asked you that I should have done?
Fire away.
What is it? What's the one question? You tell me. What should I ask you that I didn't ask you? All right, I'll rephrase it. What's the one question you like people to ask you?
I guess, what is it I love about what I do?
Oh, that's a nice question. What is it you love about what you do then?
I love seeing people light up. I love when I'm working with somebody and they just suddenly, the light bulb comes on, those connections. I was talking to somebody the other day, it's like a circuit where there are lots of pieces in place, but there may just be one or two little connections that haven't quite been made yet. And when they are, the light bulb lights up. And I love seeing that. It's literally one of those jaw-dropping moments where the person just stops, their jaw drops, and it's like, because it's a small shift, but it makes a massive difference. And I love that we can see that, because so often I think as human beings, we like to complicate things, and we think that my issues, my problems are big, they're complex. I'm going to need a big, complex, difficult, effortful response in order to change. But to help people see, no, you don't. You just need small, consistent steps.
Yeah.
And you just need to make that start.
1%,
and that's all it is.
1% a week is still a lot of percentages by the end of the year.
It is, particularly when they're cumulative. Yeah,
it is, absolutely. Yeah. So what is it that you, obviously I've got this Wellbeing Naturally. What can you say what it does, how it does, and what you're looking for, and how you help people?
Well, the full title of the business is EQUENERGY Wellbeing Naturally. And EQUENERGY is the fusion of equilibrium, so balance, and energy, because when we can get our energies back into balance, then we experience well-being very naturally. Yep. And so that's what I do. I help people to find out where their energies are out of balance, and how, for them as an individual, they can best bring them back into balance. So in terms of who I work with, it would be people who are feeling kind of where I was, really lost, hopeless, stressed, overwhelmed, exhausted, feeling like they're a square peg in a round hole, they're pushing water upstream, they're just not getting anywhere, and life just feels like it's against them.
Is this a coaching style relationship? Is it a one-to-one coaching type of relationship, or a mentoring relationship, shall I say?
Yeah, I have various different ways in which I work, largely one-to-one, but also I do workshops that are for, one of them is, for example, feel your way from stress into flow. So it's about that feel, it's about understanding stress, it's about understanding how to get into flow, and about being able to feel the difference in your body and then know how to make that shift. I also do a lot of stuff around animals. So well-being for animals, because I think as well, we're known as a nation of animal lovers, but we maybe love our animals and forget about self-care and self-love. But when we understand what our animals need, then we can turn that around to understanding more about what we need too.
What does that look like? Is that working with the owner and their pet, or what does that? Yeah. Okay. And you did this face to face or remotely over Zoom? Sorry. Zoom.
Face to face generally, but I have done was it telephone or Zoom? I think it was Zoom with a woman in Chile.
Oh, okay.
Her horses.
What is interesting is this energy work can be done remotely. Some people can. Amazing what they can achieve remotely. So it's quite impressive. Well, how do people get in touch with you if they want to?
I'm online. I've got a website which is equenergy.com.
Okay.
EQUENERGY.com. And if you put that in equenergy.com/links-list / then you can get to my links list, or obviously just go onto the website and you can find it, go along the top, and there are drop down menus, it's in there. Or my email address is Robyn, ROBYN, @equenergy.com. Or I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn and Instagram. Just search for EQUENERGY.
Lovely. Okay. Well, those links will be at the website Life, Passion and Business. They're also on the show notes above here. So please have a look at them. If you want to get in touch with Robyn, do so. So the final question that I ask all of my guests, which is the big question that Well, we're humans. We're born as animals, but we kind of had this arrogance to think that we're actually here for a purpose. Maybe we are, maybe we're not. I don't know. What's the meaning of life for you?
My sense of purpose would be just being as much ourselves as we can.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that we are here to experience life. I think that we are individuations of spirit. So we've left the absolute to be in the relative to have experience. So I think that we should just be open to all experiences and just to welcome them all and to experience them as fully as we can. And through that, to get to know who we really are so that we can be more and more that. So I don't think we have to have a big life-changing purpose, except that it changes our own life and therefore the lives around us anyway,
Mm-hmm.
when we step more into who we are and share that, allow our unique gifts to shine.
Sounds perfect to me. Thank you. So Robyn, thank you so much for your being with me today. It's been a joy to talk to you. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I didn't get too geeked out, which is pretty good news. And we kept our time reasonably tardy, so I'm really pleased with that. So thank you so much. It's been good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a joy.
All the best. There you go. We're done. Did that go where you wanted it to?
Yeah, I guess so.
I
didn't expect to talk about all the interpreting stuff, but it's a difficult one to kind of talk about in a brief.
I'm sure, but I think it's a fascinating conversation, and this is about your life journey, and I think understanding. I can imagine you being incredibly frustrated as an interpreter, knowing full well that the people you're interpreting for were having the piss taken out of them. I mean, that must be really difficult.
Yeah.
Particularly when you're powerless to do anything about it.
Because that's then you get stuck into roles and ethics and what you're allowed to do and what you should do. And also because if I were to do that, if I were to say, don't do that, that's not appropriate, I'm effectively taking power away from the deaf person. Again, you
also have this thing about who's the employer, who's the stakeholder here, who's paying you the money. If you're not working for them, it's very difficult when you're in the interpreting role. I mean, the same has happened with international negotiations and sort of stuff. They've had lots of queries with interpreters, and they've had to have all sorts of things going on in those situations because it's like, well, what agenda are they running?
Yeah. Whose agenda are they running?
Well, it's a good question, isn't it? Because if an interpreter can interpret, how something has been spoken and what kind of context it has, it could make a complete difference, couldn't it? It does make me wonder how
it does.
Well, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does. It's fascinating. Well, this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you. So the podcast takes around, I think we're 8 to 12 weeks at the moment. I'm not sure where it will fit. So we're talking a way away. I mean, it will be scheduled in and we'll let you know. When it goes live, there will be a social media pack for you. So I'll send that out to you so you can share that. We'll share that everywhere around. What I've started doing now is running a social media cycle on stuff. So as thing comes live, the podcast goes live first on the Podbean app, and then it goes out through the podcast world, and then I give it a couple of days and I start pushing it socially from my website. So, and I cycle that roughly over 8 weeks. So it'll keep coming up in social media over the next 8 weeks after it's gone live. I'm not sure if it helps, but we'll give it a go. I'm getting a bit disillusioned with social media, I must admit, at the moment. I just think it's all kind of, I don't know, really.
I think it's such a difficult time to judge such things because we've been on screen for a year and people are getting really tired with it, and our relationship to it has probably changed drastically since the start of lockdown when we weren't.
Well, I mean, podcasting has changed too, because this time last year I was getting 500 people plus per episode and it was going up, and then as soon as we hit into lockdown it started to tail off to around 300 per episode. And now we're sitting at around 200 per episode, 200 downloads per episode within the first month. And it should be over 500. Now, my only sense of that, why that's happened, is I think we've lost podcast listening time. People are not traveling in their cars as much. They're not doing things that meant they would listen to a podcast in the process. And I can think about my own situation. I don't drive anywhere at the moment. I don't go anywhere anyway. So I'm running. That's the only place I'm listening to podcasts. And I'm not doing the gym. I used to do gym 3 times a week. So I would have getting on for, I guess, we're looking at 3 to 4 hours a week of podcast time. I'm down to like, might be more, maybe 5 hours of podcast time, because I did runs as well. So yeah, I've halved my own podcast listening time. So I imagine if we replicate that across the world, that's why podcasts have dropped. And I guess social media stuff as well in some respects.
Yeah.
So it must be an interesting time for you thinking about the work you do and COVID and vaccines and all this sort of stuff that's going on. Where do you sit with all this stuff?
It's interesting. I was listening to a video that was on Facebook earlier today, and they were talking about how the general information that's coming out, say from the government or whatever, is very much about, wear your mask, get your vaccine. Where's the stuff about how to support our well-being, instead of just take these actions, which are sometimes dubious anyway? But there's nothing about support your immune system by doing X, Y, Z, even though they know that there are a lot of things that we can be doing for our own well-being.
Governments have a problem with this, don't they? Because it touches into the woo-woo, and they won't go there. They really won't go there.
But it doesn't have to touch into the woo-woo.
No.
And where do you draw the line on woo-woo anyway?
Well, I don't. I have a very flexible line on woo-woo myself, so it doesn't bother me. I too many batshit things have happened to me in my life for me not to realize that we are in a virtual simulation and someone's pulling the string somewhere. So to me, woo-woo is just woo-woo. It just happens. But governments, it just doesn't fit.
They decide where knowledge lies. So is it woo-woo? Is it outside of acceptable, or is it within acceptable? And if you think about medicine, what we call alternative or complementary medicine was the original medicine.
Yes, and that was.
And Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine.
It was commercialized, wasn't it? And then you can't make money out of that, can you?
Well, they are. I mean, if you think about Big Pharma and how much money they're getting out of all of this.
No, but you can't make money out of natural medicine. That's the trouble.
Well, you can't patent. No.
That's the issue.
You have to concoct it in a lab when it instantly loses so much. It loses the synergy with the other things that help to balance it out. So then you get the side effects. It doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
Even there was somebody, I think it was Pfizer he worked for, who was saying most of the medications don't actually do what they're supposed to do anyway. And have you seen that you can get T-shirts that saying, well, I'm taking this pill for that pill, for this pill, for that pill, blah, 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 because I didn't take a glass of water and I had a headache because I was dehydrated. So if we just drank the glass of water and had a sleep, you'd probably be fine. Got outside for a bit of natural light instead of spending all day looking at a screen.
I mean, there are situations where you have no choice. I mean, my wife was diagnosed with Parkinson's last year, so she's on L-Dopa because we had to go there. I mean, we did look at it for a while, but it got to the point where the pain got so difficult, and L-Dopa's relieved it. And what it also did, Parkinson's is a vicious disease. It affects your brain in a way that makes you basically paranoid. You get anxiety basically. And so once you started taking the L-Dopa, it literally changed her life. The anxiety went away. So we are where we are. But that's a disease that starts in the gut, apparently. Yeah.
Well, it certainly, what disease doesn't, has a gut connection.
Well, it starts apparently. Now it was interesting. Most people that get Parkinson's don't drink enough. And my wife has never drunk enough. She's never thirsty. And that's one of the first symptoms of apparently, or first precursors to Parkinson's. You don't drink enough.
Wow. I was on that road.
20 years ago, she wasn't drinking enough, apparently.
Yeah, I was on that road as a child. Everybody always used to say, you're not drinking some more. My mum was always, have a drink. I'm not thirsty. Now I drink like a fish.
Yeah, I'm constantly peeing.
Water.
Yeah, I'm constantly peeing because I drink a lot.
Yeah.
I run a lot too.
flushes all the toxins out, hopefully.
Yeah, it certainly does, that's for sure. Well, this has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed our chat today. Anything else you need from me at all?
No, I will just wait to hear from you when things go out and ready to share.
Okay, lovely. I think we're done then.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. It's been lovely to meet you, Paul.
And it's nice to meet you, Robyn. I've really enjoyed our conversation. As I said, I think we could talk a lot. I think I would quite enjoy having another conversation with you, actually, particularly about the batshit stuff that happens in life. But there we go.
Yeah. Well, if you ever fancy a conversation or whatever,
we'll catch up sometime, I'm sure. And that was Life, Passion and Business with Paul Harvey and my guest, Robyn Harris. If you'd like to connect with Robyn, she runs one-to-one mentoring and runs Zoom and in-person workshops. Feel your way from stress into flow. If you would like to find out more about Robyn's work, please check out her website, EQUENERGY.com. EQUENERGY.com. You can find her on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. You can also find her on YouTube. All of those links will be available on the podcast at lifepassionandbusiness.com. Now, did you catch the Sunday reflection, the power of coincidence? It's my thinking around the coincidence in my life and how they are just a normal part of my everyday. There's also a nice special offer at the back of that podcast, so do check it out. It's only 10 minutes and you can find it at the website lifepassionandbusiness.com. So that's it for this week. It only remains me to remind you, if you are enjoying this podcast, if you enjoy any podcast, please reward your content creators with likes, shares and reviews, because reviews are the things that power this industry and they help other people find interesting podcasts. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'll catch you later. All the best.